How's everybody? You staying hydrated? You really need to stay hydrated. I have already learned a lot today. I know now that I need to stop watching so much basketball, and if I want to prevent my bracket from being busted, I just need to become a data scientist, which should be much easier. I am so delighted to have the honor and pleasure of chatting with our last guest of the morning. I spend a lot of time thinking about privacy and security, and sometimes those things are totally in simpatico, and sometimes they are very, very much at odds with one another. And our last guest is somebody who lives in both of those realms at the same time every day. In her 25 years of her career, she has spent some time as an ethical hacker, as a government consultant, and now is a world-recognized, award-winning leader at a company that is extremely complex, very decentralized, highly regulated. I don't know how she does what she does. So please help me welcome the Vice President of Information Security and Privacy at Graham Holdings Company, Stacey Halota. Thank you.
Hi, Sara.
Here. Have a seat.
Thanks.
Okay, so first of all, your entire career was kind of a complete accident. So why don't you tell us how you got here in the first place?
Absolutely. So my career was a complete and total accident. I was on my way to become a typesetter, which if you're old enough, you remember what that is. And I got completely lost, and I stopped into another company to ask directions. And the person at the front desk said, well, if you don't find where you're looking for, if you don't get the job, come back because we need help. And so I'm embarrassed to admit that I never found my job interview, and I went back. And so this was a tiny IT company, and they needed help. And so they had basically a position for, it was kind of an administrative assistant, but also helping with their network, which was one of the first Novell file servers. And so I learned Novell. But one of the first things I did, and I think the first month I was there, was I'm sure this crowd understands. So I mapped an F drive to a G drive, and I didn't quite understand what I was doing. So I thought I copied everything, so I deleted the G drive, and that was every single file in the company. And instead of firing me right away, the owner of the company said, why did you do that? And I explained to him my logic, and he said, that kind of makes sense. So we're going to get you some training so you're not so dangerous anymore. And so I became their network administrator, their DBA, their programmer, et cetera, et cetera. And the reason I'm saying this is because my whole career is based on people that took time for me, and they were mentors for me. And so that person, Jack Bowen, basically mentored me and gave me a chance. And then I had another terrific mentor. So this company was a consultant for the State Department. And so I worked at the State Department as a consultant, and I drifted into basically when I started my work, there was no information security wasn't really a job for anybody. But I really cared about security, and I cared about doing things right. And so I worked for the State Department, and I worked in IT. And I met somebody named Eddie Schwartz, and he was going to head up, as a consultant, the Bureau of Diplomatic Security, and basically create standards for the State Department for information security. And he said, well, why don't you come and join me and work with me? And so another terrific mentor, and that's how I learned about information security. And after that, I was working as a consultant still, and met another great mentor, Patrick Sullivan, a luminary in privacy, and he taught me about privacy. So, I've been brought along through my whole career just by people that really cared for me and that took the time to explain, and really, just took the time to make sure I got the training that I needed, and it's been absolutely terrific.
So grateful to all of those people for
Absolutely.
Getting you to this point and with me on the stage. Graham Holdings Company was the Washington Post company and is now a really fascinating I was almost going to say a mess of a company, but I only say that because of how challenging your job must be. So can you tell us about the company and how that relates to your job?
Absolutely. So when another happy accident where, I went to Graham Holdings because I was working for Pricewaterhouse as a consultant, and I did work for what was at that time the Washington Post company, and really I met the director of internal audit there, Leslie Bauer, and she liked me, and she basically advocated for creating my job at Graham Holdings. And so when I went to interview for this job in 2003, every single person that I interviewed with basically said, "You realize this is a very decentralized company, right?" And that was kind of the theme of my job, is basically we are extremely decentralized. We're in many different industries. We're in education, healthcare, manufacturing. We just bought some car dealerships. So we have TV stations. So it's extremely decentralized and also very
Diverse.
Just very extremely diverse. Yeah.
And a lot of those industries are very heavily regulated industries already, right?
Absolutely.
And then GDPR comes into your life, the General Data Protection Regulation, which I'm sure a lot of you already know about and probably hate. And now you've got the California Consumer Privacy Law also on its way. How has that changed your life, and what is the most challenging part of these consumer privacy laws to somebody who has to handle both information security and privacy at an organization like yours?
Absolutely. So I think handling GDPR was a little bit easier because we're a global company already. And so we already have, so Kaplan, our biggest company, has 2 major divisions in Europe. And so we were already regulated by the Data Protection Directive. Mm-hmm. So I think that helped us because the GDPR really is kind of a supercharged version of the directive. And so we were already following a lot of the principles that are in the GDPR. But the challenge is really with GDPR in just taking what you have already and kind of repackaging it in a way that meets their documentation requirements. With the California Consumer Privacy Act, that is a different challenge in that the definition of personally identifiable information is a little bit different. And so you really have to look at what you're collecting, and they even define things that are coming from devices and homes and things like that as PII. So we're just basically doing a broader net around what we had previously considered PII.
First of all, the fact that you just said that complying with GDPR wasn't that hard is hilarious to me because I've never heard anybody say anything remotely like that. But when you say that the definition of PII is a little different now with CCPA coming, can you give us a little bit more information on that? Because it is very critical if you're talking about just your overall philosophy on how to approach these laws. Do you really need to approach a European-based law and an American-based law differently within the same company?
Sure.
How do you go about that whole thing?
Absolutely. I think kind of the foundstone of what you look at is what do you consider personally identifiable information? And so, you might consider like a social security number or, somebody's, email, phone number, address, et cetera, PII. We're looking at kind of the broader definition of device information, which actually as a company really don't collect. It's more like an Alexa type data collection where you're looking at devices within a home or nests and things like that. But it's really just being very careful about understanding and making sure that your definition of PII is broad enough to basically encompass all of that. And I would say too, I didn't mean to say the GDPR was easy, but I think that it was just easier for us as an international company because we had already, really when you look at the GDPR and the definitions of it, you were supposed to be doing a lot of the GDPR anyway, under the current directive. And for us, it was just really kind of taking what we were doing already and making sure that our definitions of things like, and I'll give you an example of a data protection impact assessment, which is part of GDPR. There's very specific formats and things you're supposed to do. So the existing risk assessments and security assessments they were doing, we basically had to look at those and kind of just repackage them and say that this was our DPIA, and add any other context that they might have needed for that.
So building on that, then, what other changes have you made to your people, your processes, and your technologies in order to adapt to all of this new regulation coming your way?
Absolutely. So we already used Archer, which is a governance and risk compliance kind of package. So we already used Archer for a lot of things. And so the major thing that we did for GDPR and that we're doing now for the California Consumer Privacy Act and the many laws that are coming behind that, because I think there's 8 or 9 copycat bills right now in state legislation. And also there's several laws being considered at the federal level. So what we've done is basically take our existing Archer solution and repurposed it in some ways. So if we need to basically redefine what a risk assessment is and add the existing things that we do and make that a DPIA, we've done that in Archer. And we've also expanded our document repository so that we collect any information that we need for these laws into Archer.
Now, a lot of people in this audience would probably not want to admit it, but they really do have to admit it, at least to themselves, that they don't really know what data they're collecting or where it is. But you have made a lot of progress in that area. So can you tell us about how you approach data asset management and governance?
Absolutely. So I'll never forget when I read that it was one of the major data breaches, and this was one of the first ones that became very public, that 75% of what was stolen, they didn't need. And that was kind of burned into my brain. And so one of the things that we do at Graham Holdings, and it's important enough to us that we actually report it into our board, is that we have, as one of our company metrics, we have a mandatory data inventory that you have to do every year. And one of my fabulous employees, Kathleen Dillon, does that. And it's called the Sensitive Data Project, which is kind of looked at with kind of horror by some people because she has this enormous list of questions that she asks. But it's basically, what do you have? What data elements do you have? Where do they go? What reports do you have based on this? Where are they stored? Where is the backup, et cetera, et cetera? I mean, it's an enormous job, but it's really critical to us to know what we have. And so it's an iterative process. We do it every year. It's mandatory, as I mentioned, reported to the board. But to us, it's kind of, the keystone of our business is information. And so it's really understanding what you have and what you collect. But at the same time, we understand that what we collect is precious and it's important, and it's really important to only collect what we need. And so we need to basically minimize the collection of really sensitive data. And so what we do is when we do this data inventory, another metric that we have is, okay, we know what you collected, but have you deleted anything this year? And if not, why not? And so what I mean by that is that we seek to minimize the really sensitive data that we hold. So we don't want to hold identities of people everywhere. So we hold them where we need to in our production environments. But one of the things that we do is that we scramble data in non-production and we tokenize data. So for example, we don't hold any credit card numbers if we can help it within Graham Holdings. We tokenize that data. And it's just really kind of just keeping our super sensitive data footprint to a minimum and just constantly keeping that to the forefront by having metrics that measure that and that are reported to our board.
So much easier to secure data that you don't have in the first place, right?
Exactly.
who is involved in all of that stuff? Like, are you talking to the people in the line of business, the people in the marketing departments? Are you talking to other IT services people across the board, or just everybody is responsible for it?
So part of my job, and it's really critical, is to talk to everybody, because if I go to a business and say, well, I just want to delete all this stuff, that doesn't go over very well. So it's really important to basically build relationships with, the CEO, the CFO, the marketing, the HR people, the legal people. And actually, I found that, legal is, they're such a great, I mean, all these people are great allies, but just from a legal perspective, because we have to comply with so many laws, understanding and knowing what the concerns are of your general counsels at the various business divisions are so important. So it's really a conversation with everybody. It's not just going in and saying, we're going to delete all this stuff. It's having those interviews. And one of the other critical departments is talking to marketing, because, in order to thrive as a business, we need to market what we do. And so you don't want to say, I'm just going to, pull all this data that you have. You have to understand what they need. And then you have to understand kind of when it's time to, perform some kind of data retention and say, these leads aren't so valuable anymore, so we're going to basically, put these into deep storage or delete them. But it's absolutely critical to talk to every part of the business and understand what they're doing, because if you don't do that, you're not going to be able to do anything, basically.
Okay, that sounds great. But I know my marketing people and I love them.
Right.
But I know that if I said we can collect people's shoe sizes, they would find a use for it, right? So, or if I didn't say that, they would have found a use for it already. How have you managed to get buy-in for plans like this, to say, let's not collect all of that stuff. Let's delete all of that stuff that we already collected about all of, Graham Holdings companies, customers' shoe sizes, or whatever it might be that they have. How do you convince them to relinquish it?
It's always a hard conversation, because, you want to be able to market to people. And I'd say that it's really, to me, the most important thing is forging a relationship with people and talking to them and understanding what they need, so that I can make a logical, basically, argument that I don't think, that these things are really things that will be valuable to us as a company. And it is, it's a complicated conversation in some cases. And, I've had, missteps myself, as far as, I think things should be, deleted and they don't. So, but I think the key thing in every conversation is just building a relationship, so that they understand where I'm coming from and I understand what they need.
Right. Do you have, would that be something that you approach in awareness programs? Do you do any kind of standard end user awareness programs for everybody?
Absolutely. So when you look statistically at why data breaches happen in companies, I'd say Kevin Mandia owns a company. It's called Mandiant, and they have investigated probably most of the major data breaches that have happened in the United States and other places. And one of the key things that happens in a data breach is that basically somebody gets a phishing email within their company, and they click on it, and then it exploits some kind of vulnerability, or asks them for credentials that the person shouldn't be giving. And so one of the huge things that we do at Graham Holdings is we have phishing exercises where we train people. We send phishing emails all the time to people that are tests, and we give them education. And we also try to prevent people from, even if they did click on a phishing email, from it being exploited. So one of the huge things that we do is that we use multi-factor authentication, because another big factor in data breaches is that people can get into your company by using your credentials, by stealing somebody's password. And so we have a mandatory multi-factor authentication where basically when you try to get into email or Workday or big information systems, you have to use, we use a program that is an app that sends a push. So you have to basically push to get into these applications. But those couple of things and that type of education is so critical for companies just to understand, because this is when you look at Target and RSA and all these huge data breaches, a lot of them just started with a simple phishing email. And so we try to prevent that the best way we can through education.
It's all good stuff. But obviously you talked about data breaches, and we all hate to think about them because we don't want them to happen to us. But we are talking a lot about incident response planning at Interop because it is so important. What are you doing to prevent and plan for if the worst happens at your company?
Absolutely. So I think it's foolish to think that, you look, data breaches happen, and I think it's foolish not to basically prepare for them. And so one of the other metrics that we report up to our board is we have a mandatory incident response program where every single company at Graham Holdings has to go through a series of response exercises. And we also use a tool called Resilient that basically will model out a data breach and all the things that happen. And we use consultants, and we also have, within Graham Holdings, we have a company called Cyber Vista that does board level training and incident response breach handling. And so we use Cyber Vista. I partner with them to basically do the training throughout the company. So we train for things on what happens if you have a ransomware attack, or what happens if, all these records just got stolen, or what happens if, one of our social media accounts gets compromised, and just, I think that in a kind of panicky situation, everything might not go as planned, but I think it's helpful to practice to the extent you can to make sure that you have prepared the best you can.
Do you vary that at all by branch to branch? Since you said it's such a decentralized company and the threats might be a little bit different, or does everybody kind of get the same sauce?
No, we definitely take into consideration the type of companies that we have. And we, if, one company is a manufacturing company, their version of a data breach is going to be very different. So it's basically if they have a ransomware attack at a plant, for example, or if one of our car dealerships has an attack against their customer database, or, in some of the other units, it's, did your healthcare information get stolen? So we definitely take all that into account, and we customize the breach practices according to the company.
I've got to figure out this whole car dealership thing. It's such a fascinating company. I'm serious. But shifting gears a little bit, you talked a lot up at the top about mentorship, which was clearly really important to you. First of all, are you involved in any mentoring now at this stage of your career? And how would the people in the audience here get involved? What do you recommend?
Absolutely. So there's two organizations that both I'm involved with and my employees are involved with as well. So one is the International Consortium of Minority Cybersecurity Professionals.
Yeah.
And the other one is Women's Cyberjutsu. And those are just two that I know. There's others, but both of them. So it's really interesting. So in cyber, I think the whole profession is 11% are women. So, and there's also really statistics around kind of the lack of women and minorities in both cyber and IT. And so both of these organizations really give a handout to both women and minorities just in getting both into, some are focused on IT, but into cyber positions. And I just highly recommend them both, because they're just terrific organizations, and they do just a tremendous amount in educating and just giving either free or low priced education. And I just think they're both terrific.
Good stuff. One thing that we definitely struggle with in the cybersecurity field is this giant skills shortage that we talk about, that there are simply millions of jobs that we're looking at that are going unfilled. And some people say that, well, there's just no qualified people for it. Others say we're just asking for too much and that we're not willing to train people who have the potential in order to, make them qualified for these jobs. When you're looking to fill a position for somebody who's going to work for you, what kinds of things do you look for, and what kind of training do you recommend that people provide in order to have a great cybersecurity, a great privacy professional?
Absolutely. So there's kind of there's a basic, there's a baseline, and actually I mentioned, CyberVista, and there's other companies that provide just the basic certification for information security is the CISSP. And then there's the International Association of Privacy Professionals that provides privacy education, and they also provide a huge amount of almost free resources with their membership. So I look for people, not necessarily, they don't necessarily have to be certified, but they have to be, engaged and interested in cyber. And I think that, basically, absolutely getting the CISSP or, the certified ethical hacking or things like that. But, what I look for is just people that are, just very engaged and interested in the field, and that, want to make the world better, to me, by being an information security and privacy professional, because you can do so much in those fields.
I like that. I like trying to make the world better, because
Absolutely.
It's an important distinction when you're looking for experienced people in security, since the history of the industry was not always that way.
Yep.
As we're getting low on time, we've talked about a lot of different things. We've talked about data asset management. We've talked about metrics. We've talked about careers. What else do you want us to know? What other projects are you working on, or final thoughts do you have for the folks at Interop?
I guess my final thought is that I just want to give a big shout out to the team of people that work for me. They are absolutely magnificent, and they work so hard. They are tireless, and, can I say people's names? So Kathleen Dillon, Carrie Armstrong, Joseph Van Wyck, Pat Flesher, Kelly Tracy. They just, Anya Manera, Felicia Donahue, they're just absolutely wonderful people, and they work so hard. They seek to understand our business units. They just amaze me every single day, and I'm super grateful for them, and I'm really privileged to work with them.
Okay, I do have one more last question. I always sneak one more in. I started at the very top talking about the intersection of security and privacy, how sometimes they go together like peas and carrots, and sometimes they seem to hate each other's guts. In your experience, is it ever a challenge for you having to do both of those things? Are you ever at war with yourself?
I think because as an information security professional, one of my primary goals is to protect our customer and employee information. I think the privacy side really syncs well with that, because protecting people's information keeps it private. And so I really don't have that kind of, battle going on. I actually think it's they're very complementary. And so, I know that there are, different aspects of privacy, but I really feel like being in my position is really the best of both worlds. And I'm super grateful to be able to do it, because to me, protecting our customer and employee data is paramount. and the fact that that also protects their privacy, to me, is extremely complimentary.
Well, Stacy, it has been a pleasure to talk to you again.
Thank you, Sara.
You so much for being here. Please help me out. Give a big hand to Stacey Halota.
Thank you.